Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's learn. My name's Connor. If you're new, original link to the video from Kings and Generals, top of the description, preemptive like. How did the Slavs come to the Balkans? Early states and Roman response.
Of the Danube.
Cool. Let's go.
It was a summer day on the shores of the Danube River
Excuse me.
when three brothers crossed on a raft, seeking a new home. It was time for them to part ways. The blonde brother Zvonimir had decided to go to the sea to find his lover. He exclaimed, "Love isn't for sale, nor can it be bought. Who cannot love should not set off." With that, he set off for Dalmatia. The brown-haired brother Dusan...
Hey, Lubov. Isn't the cap Ljubljana? Does that mean like Love City or something? Or
set off.
No, maybe not.
With that, he set off for Dalmatia. The brown-haired brother, Dusan, was hoping to find a village in the south. He waved and said, "There, far away, far beyond the sea, there is my village and there is my love." And with that, he marched towards Sirmia. The black-haired brother, Simeon, headed southwest to find a musician's village. He shouted, "A caval is playing, up and down near the village. I will go to it," and bid his brothers farewell, making for Thrace. This fictional tale represents the descent of the Slavs in the Balkans in the late antique period. Known to the Byzantines as Sklaveni, the Slavs' arrival in the Balkan Peninsula forever changed the cultural landscape of southern Europe, resulting in the birth of many ethnicities that make up a prominent part of Europe's cultural tapestry in modern times. But how did it happen? How did the Slavs become the dominant ethnic group in the peninsula that, since ancient times, has been known as the crossroad of empires? Welcome to our video on the Slavic descent to the Balkans and its world-changing consequences. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us. We couldn't be doing it without your help. Our story begins in the 6th century CE.
Justinian?
During the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. It was during this period that tribes considered to be Slavic by modern scholars begin appearing in the writings of Eastern Roman historians, like Procopius and Jordanes, who described them as living on the edges of the Eastern Roman Empire in modern Ukraine and Central Europe. These ancient historians claimed these tribes had names like the Antes and the Veneti. Said tribes appeared alongside the nomadic confederation known as the Avars, and were utilized by the Eastern Romans as foederati, or auxiliary allied troops, against more hostile invading tribes from further north.
So when I think of Slavs, or where I would imagine the origin of Slavs come from, okay, it would be the same as the origin of any other people, but just kind of like you have the Cossacks, right? And then you have the more Central Asian steppe people. And then you have more of the northern, a bit west, a bit east of Scandinavia, and you have Scandinavians, and you have more Germanic people. And then the people sandwiched in between all of those, I would just call the Slavs, right?
Whoever these people were, they probably began slowly moving into the Balkans during this period. During Justinian's reign, Byzantium reached the zenith of its military power, but after his death, the Eastern Roman Empire fell into crisis. Many Avars and Slavs took advantage of this. Once subject to Byzantine vassalage, they now began to raid and plunder into the rich imperial territories to the south. It is unclear whether these Slavic groups did this in an organized manner or spontaneously, but Byzantine sources mention these raids. In fact, during the Byzantine Sassanid War of 602 to 626 CE, the Avars, who had by then established a powerful Khaganate in Central Europe, used their Slavic allies to besiege the Byzantine city of Thessaloniki and even besiege Constantinople. Some of the Slavic tribes then settled on their own in regions across the Balkans, such as in Bulgaria. These events are widely considered to be the first wave of Slavic migrations into the Balkans. Another wave of Slavic migrations occurred during the 8th century CE, when various tribes exploited the Byzantines' loss of control in the Balkans to settle deeper into the region. As the Byzantines were facing trouble due to the early Islamic expansion, and their northern borders were constantly being raided, the Slavs had an easy time slipping into the peninsula. It is unclear as to whether these migrations caused mass displacement of the pre-Slavic populations, but it seems unlikely that this occurred. Archaeological remains have shown a mixture of Byzantine and foreign styles in pottery, indicating some interaction between ethnic groups. There is also a debate on whether Byzantium kept control of the region of the Balkans at all. Indeed, it is possible that by the 7th century CE, chronic political instability in eastern Rome had caused the empire to lose all control over its Balkan provinces.
So he's saying that if there was more of an abrupt change between
on whether Byzantium kept control of the region of the Balkans at all. Indeed, it is possible that indicating some remains have shown a mixture of Byzantine and foreign styles in pottery.
So if the remains had more of a Byzantine and then separate from a lot of remains with more what we would call Balkan style of, I can't think. I'm trying to make a good point here.
Archaeological remains have shown a mixture of Byzantine and foreign styles in pottery.
So if they didn't get along at least for a bit and have mixed culture, then you wouldn't have a mix of the two types of pottery in the same next to the same remains. Wow. That took me forget it. That was so bad.
Indicating some interaction between ethnic groups. There is also a debate on whether Byzantium kept control of the region of the Balkans at all. Indeed, it is possible that by the 7th century CE, chronic political instability in eastern Rome had caused the empire to lose all control over its Balkan provinces. The arrival of a new dominant ethno-linguistic group in the Balkans resulted in the creation of a new social order in the region, which the ailing Eastern Roman Empire had to acknowledge the reality of and participate in. During the 8th century, Byzantium was still reeling from the crippling blow of losing most of their eastern provinces to the natal Islamic Caliphate, while also dealing with endemic civil wars. So initially they had very little resources to devote to the Slavic incursions into the Balkans. This enabled the Slavs to penetrate as far south as the Peloponnese in southern Greece, where some ethnonyms still have Slavonic roots. Byzantine elites were aghast at this, seeing this as an incursion of barbarian peoples into civilized Greek-speaking lands. Eventually, however, the Byzantines bounced back from their geopolitical woes by utilizing a wide toolkit of diplomatic and military strategies. Throughout the 8th century, Byzantium fought many battles and retook many parts of the Balkans from the Slavic tribal confederacies and proto-states like the First Bulgarian Empire. After reconquering these territories, the Byzantines found themselves ruling over a large Slavic population, whose obedience to the imperial throne they ensured through a carrot-and-stick approach. For instance, in the regions of modern-day Montenegro and Croatia, local Slavic elites were allowed to rule over their territories, but only in the presence of Byzantine military garrisons. This combination of military crackdowns and local accommodation helped the Byzantines keep the southern Slavs pacified. However, it became increasingly untenable as Croatia, Serbia, and Bulgaria formed themselves into stronger states. The Byzantines also utilized a tactic that was rather morbid by today's standards: population deportation.
So far, the Slavs in the Balkans were a people of more northern Europe who began to encroach more on the Balkans as the Byzantines' power dwindled. And then as the Byzantine power rose up a little bit more again, and not just moving down, but also sent down as soldiers. That's what I'm getting so far, and it makes sense.
Reset tactic that was rather morbid by today's standards: population deportations. Resettlement was a common practice in antique and medieval societies for troublesome populations, and it was used by everyone from the Inca Empire to the ancient Persians. Byzantium was no different, and in order to prevent the Slavic tribes from confederating and rising against them, they transferred Greek populations into Slavic territories and also moved Slavs out of the Balkans. Some Slavs even ended up in Asia Minor, where they existed for centuries after. These deportations were violent affairs, with many people perishing in the process. Byzantium...
Yeah, horrific process, but probably a smart one by a lot of powers, especially back then, where identity and identifying with your power, or populations identifying with your main culture, are going to be less likely to rise up or be persuaded to go against you. So horrific thing to do, but it's not surprising that so many cultures and empires in the past did it.
Also had softer measures to control and integrate their Slavic populations, namely to convert them to Christianity and civilize them according to the Byzantine concept. To that end, the Byzantines attempted to baptize pagan Slavic leaders.
Ooh, also another great way that religion is helpful, that instead of having to move everyone out, just convert everyone, and then you know they're going to be a bit more loyal if since religion is a giant part of culture.
And take their children as hostages to the imperial court, where they could be converted to Christianity. This had varying degrees of success, and during the 7th to 8th century CE, many Slavic tribes appeared to have become at least nominally Christian, although some later lapsed back into paganism. Eventually, the Balkan Slavs would be Christianized, but as we will discuss later, this did not necessarily make them subservient to the Mother Church in Constantinople. In general, we can see that Byzantium utilized various strategies to pacify and rule over the new Slavic communities in their Balkan territories. Let us now discuss one of the most important aspects of the Balkan Slavic settlement by going into more detail about the specific regions of the Balkans they settled in.
I'd like to learn more about the Avars.
During the initial waves of migration, the Slavs settled farther than the current borders of the Slavic Balkan nations of today. We have already discussed that even southern Greece was settled by Slavs during this time. However, no Slavic state emerged there, and the people were either deported or assimilated into Hellenism. In the northern Balkans, things were rather different. There, a multitude of Slavonic nations emerged from a collection of very different cultural journeys. One of these journeys begins in the Carpathian Mountains, where a nebulous Slavic tribal confederacy...
Hey, that's still part of the Croatian flag today, right?
Known as the White Croats, was said to have lived during late antiquity. With the coming of the Avars, the White Carpathian Mountains, where a nebulous Slavic tribal confederacy known as the White Croats was said to have lived during late antiquity. With the coming of the Avars, the White Croats appear to have dispersed, but some remnants remained and intermixed in the region of the Carpathians. According to the historian Paul Robert Magochi, these remnants mixed with other local tribes and centuries later became the basis of the Rusyns. The Rusyns are the fourth Eastern Slavic ethnic group, alongside the Russians, Ukrainians and Belarusians, and still exist today. In modern times, the Rusyn people inhabit the regions of Vojvodina in Serbia, as well as Carpathian regions in Slovakia, Ukraine and Poland. It is said that the Avar incursions pushed...
Is there a difference between ethnic groups and cultural groups? Does anyone know?
Many White Croats into the Balkans.
When I think of ethnic, I think of race. But does that mean, how would they know that these are four separate races of Slavs? That doesn't really make much sense. So it kind of confused me there.
Poland. It is said that the Avar incursions pushed many White Croats into the Balkans. Consequently, the modern Croatian people consider these ancient White Croat migrants to be their direct ancestors. But it is far more likely that it was a hodgepodge of tribes, as well as many local Illyrians, Greeks and Latins coexisting. The notion of the Croats may have been utilized as a unifying civic identity by the later Grand Duchy and Kingdom of Croatia, but the region probably remained mixed. Many other Slavs moved to the south in the 7th century and formed the core of the Kingdom of Dicilia and later the Kingdom of Serbia in the 8th to 9th century CE. The former state was likely a mixed territory, where pre-Slavic, local, Byzantine and Slavonic cultures mixed in architecture and practices. In the region of Thrace, the local Slavs came into contact with the wandering Turkic Bulgars in the 7th century, who gave them protection in exchange for vassal status. This synthesis of Slav and Bulgar peoples became the ethnogenesis of the Bulgarian people, and the two Bulgarian empires they would forge later in the Middle Ages. We can thus see that the destination of each Slavic tribe greatly influenced their cultural development based on who their neighbors were. These varied destinations show that the early southern Slavs were a diverse bunch. This has led many scholars to raise the question of how the Slavic tribes functioned before they formed kingdoms and states.
That's a question I want to know about a lot of people. That's a question I want to learn the answer to about, say, the Germanic tribes outside of Roman control, but there was just so much more history and evidence of Roman life compared to that area, and so I want to know that about a lot of different cultures.
This is a difficult question of how the
where they're kind of on the periphery a lot of more established historical records of empires, but they're kind of like, they're on the periphery, kind of a side character that you don't know more of the background of.
The southern Slavs were a diverse bunch. This has led many scholars to raise the question of how the Slavic tribes functioned before they formed kingdoms and states. This is a difficult question to answer, as the sources on the early Sclaveni societies are external, written almost exclusively by Byzantine Greeks, and not the ancient Slavic peoples themselves. Said Greeks have interesting things to say about Slavic society. Procopius, for example, mentions that the early Sclaveni practiced a form of military democracy before coming to the Balkans, but no further evidence exists of this. What Procopius was commenting on was likely a highly decentralized, anarchic clan-based society, which organized itself into stronger wholes when under threat. The Sclaveni appear to have been a quite warlike people, but this perception might have arisen due to the bias of the Byzantine sources describing them. What we do know...
Was there a non-warlike people?
Is that these early Slavic communities were culturally and linguistically diverse.
I feel like if you can enter an age where you have to be warlike in order to enter an age where you can focus on stuff other than war, and so it's a bit rich coming from ones that...
They likely did not have one unified cultural consciousness. With that said, the many ancient Slavic tribes shared some cultural commonalities, their pagan religion being one of these. Some pre-Christian Slavic deities, like the mysterious god Svarachich, appear in the folklore of multiple regions, for example. Other deities, like the equally enigmatic Svetovid, also appear to have been especially revered in multiple southern Slavic societies. When the early Slavs migrated into the Balkans, their cultures and customs intermixed with the pre-existing populations in the region, such as the Illyrians, Thracians, and various Greek and Latin-speaking communities. Later Turkic groups like the Bulgars entered the region, adding another layer to this cultural tapestry.
It's a new thing I've learned in this video. I didn't know the Bulgarians had some Turkish roots. I didn't know that.
This resulted in the region's Slavic cultures becoming deeply syncretized with non-Slavic customs and beliefs. There are very few details outside of archaeology discussing the pre-Christian southern Slavic societies. However, what little we know shows the Sclaveni as a fascinating cultural phenomenon in the Balkan tapestry of the early medieval period. Eventually, the various early Slavic tribes in the Balkans began to form larger, more centralized polities, which not only broke free from Byzantine overlordship, but stood up to Western threats, like the Frankish Empire and Hungarian Kingdom. Croatia managed to form a duchy and kingdom in the 7th and 10th century CE, which was capable of producing its own Slavonic literature, and was in contact with both the Franks and the Byzantines. Demographically, this Croatian state was inhabited by a mixture of pre-Slavic inhabitants and new Slavic peoples. The Croats oscillated in their religious allegiances between the increasingly divided Rome and Constantinople. During the Great Schism of 1054, when the Catholic and Orthodox churches split permanently, the Croats would end up picking Catholicism. This manifested into a controversy as to whether to use Latin or Slavonic languages in liturgy. Despite these challenges, the Duchy-turned-Kingdom of Croatia created a sophisticated culture which merged Slavic, Byzantine, Hungarian, Germanic, and Italian cultural spheres. Eventually, Croatia moved westward in its political orientation, and in the 10th century CE, it was annexed by Catholic Hungary, firmly turning away from Orthodox Eastern Europe and towards Catholic Western Europe. Their cousins in Bosnia, however, were in a much more fluid geopolitical space, managing to build their own quasi-independent Banat-turned Kingdom of Bosnia between the 12th to 14th century CE. This state, while officially Catholic in its state religion, also contained populations of Orthodox Christians and adherents to the mysterious Bosnian Heterodox Church in its domain. The Bosnians retained their independence throughout much of the Middle Ages, forging alliances with their surrounding Albanian and Slavic neighbors. Further south, in the 8th century, the region of Dioclea and its surrounding Slavonic territories morphed into the kingdom and later the empire of Serbia in the 11th to 12th century CE, which embraced Orthodox Christianity and used it to leverage its own position in the Balkan geopolitical scene. The natal Serbian state faced many wars against the Bulgarians in the 800s and was sometimes occupied by them. Bulgaria itself merged its Turkic and Slavic cultural origins to forge its own unique culture. It created two major empires, both of which managed to compete with the regional powerhouse of Byzantium. The first one, built by mighty kings like Krum and Asparuk, managed to control large swathes of the Balkans before converting to Christianity. Right? The second one even tried to compete with Byzantium for dominance over the Balkans, and for a time was quite the regional hegemon.
Basil II, I think that's when he comes in.
As we can see, each Balkan Slavic state that emerged was quite a formidable enemy to their neighbors, and each developed its own sophisticated high and low culture. The rise of these medieval Slavic states in the Balkans presented significant geopolitical challenges for
Basil II has the title the Bulgar Slayer, so I think that's self-explanatory.
The former medieval Slavic states in the Balkans presented significant geopolitical challenges for the former hegemon of the region, the Eastern Romans. With the Greek-speaking empire no longer able to use military means to reclaim its former Balkan territories, it instead utilized its cultural soft power to try to bring the southern Slavic peoples back under its influence. Through the use of Christianization and the spread of the Glagolitic and later Cyrillic alphabets aimed to transliterate the Slavic languages into a writing system based on Greek, the Byzantines formed what scholars have called the Byzantine Commonwealth, or the Byzantine Ideal. This was a network of cultural, diplomatic, and theological connections which was intended to ensure Byzantine control over Eastern Europe. However, conversion to Orthodox Christianity did not guarantee obedience to Eastern Rome. In fact, many South Slavonic states used their newfound Christianization and script to forge their own destiny and make themselves independent actors. For instance, Bulgaria in the 9th century CE used its clergy to establish an Orthodox church independent from the Patriarch in Constantinople, and its emperors, like Simeon the Great, styled themselves as emperors of the Romans to show they were leaders of the Orthodox world and the true rulers of Byzantium. It was in Bulgaria that the Glagolitic script became the Cyrillic script that many Slavic countries use today. Similarly, in Serbia, scholars like Sava the Illuminator made the Zakono Pravilo a unified legal code and organized the Church of Serbia as an independent force beyond Byzantine control. Other Slavic groups, like the Croats and Bosnians, preferred to have a neutral foreign policy, choosing Catholicism over Orthodox Christianity and finding a balance between the two faiths. The decentralized nature of the Byzantine Commonwealth enabled these states and their populations to be more independent of their stronger neighbors, producing incredible art and architecture like those in Belgrade, making their own theological and literary schools like that in Preslav, or even making imperial claims to challenge the might of Rome. The Balkan Slavic peoples promoted their own interests. In doing so, they produced some of the most incredible high cultures in the medieval Balkans, building societies as fascinating as those of their Illyrian, Dacian and Thracian predecessors, as great as those of their Hungarian, Byzantine and Frankish neighbors, and as enduring of those as their eventually Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian and Venetian conquerors. By the time of the rise of the Byzantine Commonwealth, the Slavonic peoples had been fully settled in the Balkan lands. When they first arrived, they were perceived as uncultured barbarians, but time would prove their Roman detractors wrong. Centuries later, in the High Middle Ages, there were many Slavic populations and many kingdoms, duchies and empires with illustrious civilizations. Influenced by and influencing their neighbors, the Balkan Slavs forged their own places in the tapestry of the Balkans, and the Balkans would not be the same without them. This is nowhere clearer than in the 7 modern Slavic states of the Balkans, which stretch across the peninsula like a bow. If one walks the shores of Budva or Dubrovnik, or goes to the cathedrals and mosques of Sarajevo and Sofia, they will encounter the culmination of over a millennium of Slavic presence in the Balkans. This presence was seeded from the humble steppes of the Slaveni, and was fertilized in lands where Illyrians, Dacians, Thracians and Greeks lived. The flowers that blossomed were the Slavic peoples of the Balkans, very much in place in the frontier gardens of the Balkan Peninsula. More videos on Slavic history are on the way. To ensure you don't miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content.
Great
Consider
video.
joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our...
All right, so it is a little comical seeing some nations that were these more nomadic and then were able to settle down and create these cultures, and then seeing other nomadic people and being like, they're barbarians. It's like, what do you think how do you think you lived before settling down and creating this thing? And then what do you know? It repeats over again. I find that kind of funny. Very good video. I love when I've learned a bit about the Byzantine fighting against the Bulgarians. I remember Basil II. And I love learning a video, watching a video like this where I learn about the secondary character in that series as a main character and how it connects to other places around it, and it really fills in everything in. It's a really satisfying experience. It's the most satisfying feeling I get when learning about history, and it's really cool. And I love it a lot. So very interesting video. I'd appreciate any comments down below, answering any of the questions I had. You guys are always awesome with that. If I said something wrong, call me out. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.